Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable Podcast, the only show that dares to be both on location and on topic, or on premises and on premise. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries to discuss a single concept. In this episode, we're discussing object storage, specifically the question of object storage being the future of all storage. Before we begin, let's meet who's on the panel today.
Hi, I'm Gina Rosenthal. I founded Digital Sunshine Solutions. We can be found at digitalsunshinesolutions.com. And the best place to get in contact with me is on Twitter. I'm G Minx.
Hi, I'm Rajiv Rajavas-Reddy, VP of Product Management at Pure Storage. You can find me on Twitter at r_Rajiv.
Hi, my name is Arjan Timmerman. You can find me on Twitter as @ArjanTim, and I'm a partner at Tech Unplugged.
And I'm Stephen Foskett, founder of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT. You can find me online at gestaltit.com and at sfoskett on Twitter. So originally, storage was storage. Storage was disks, right? And we had block storage, and then we had file systems on top of it. And that's sort of how things were. Then along came, object storage and cloud storage and all these other kinds of storage. And it seems that the tide of history is turning. And specifically, it looks like it's turning toward object storage. And this is especially true in the cloud and Kubernetes and cloud applications. So today's premise is essentially this. Object storage is going to eat the whole storage world, and all storage will be object storage in the future. I think, Rajiv, that's sort of your belief. So why don't you kick us off by talking a little bit about, why should we think that object storage is the future of storage?
Yeah, Stephen, I probably wouldn't go that far, but close. If you think about object storage, traditionally object storage had been associated with cheap and deep archival data. And even just a couple of years ago, performance object would have been treated as an oxymoron. That is no longer the case. As you have more and more people building new applications, they're using cloud architectures and cloud paradigms. And S3 is a key component of that, object storage. And even analytic applications that require high performance, like Splunk and Vertica in Eon mode, et cetera, are providing object interfaces. I feel that this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's probably going to be a lot more applications that are going to be requiring object, high performance object, not just slow, cheap, and deep object.
Yeah, I agree to what you're saying, but I'm still seeing a lot of the older applications as well. There's still a lot going on in the industry where a lot of the applications and all of the things that are around those applications still use other kind of storage. And I'm kind of curious on what is going on with that. I still see with PLCs, to name an example on that, they are vastly using either it could be file. It's never a object storage based solution for those people, and those kind of applications need storage. They got that storage for multiple years now, and they will need that storage for another multiple years. So I'm seeing a lot of storage offerings that are not concluded with object storage. So I think there's still, for the next couple of years at least, multiple ways of getting storage to an application.
I have a ton of questions, especially after, VMworld this year and Project Monterey being announced, right? So I agree with AJ. I think that there's still applications that aren't going to be able to run on object storage, and I think that's okay. I also see that, we are going to have storage that can accommodate a very, very wide, across lots and lots of nodes, operating system. And I think that's where object storage really comes into play. And we look at, going to using machine learning and deep learning to power AI, that's really, I think, the kind of architecture that we need. I guess one of the questions I have after that announcement of Project Monterey, I went back and was trying to look more at smart NICs and how they relate to storage. I wonder if that is something that object storage is already taking advantage of, and maybe Rajiv knows, or if that's something that will make object storage even more relevant.
Yeah. So Gina, I think my perspective is, if I take a step back, right? I've been in IT for a really long time. And in the old days, it was fairly simple. You had databases, you used block storage, and then you had home directories and general purpose NAS, you used file storage. And then over time, you came up with, basically, there were companies that started trying to address rich media. Media entertainment, oil and gas, and slowly genomics, et cetera. And file no longer was acceptable in the way it was, right, as a single filer or a toaster. And so scale-out NAS became prevalent. And scale-out NAS was trying to address two things, right? One was rich media, which was primarily large files. And the second one is scale, namespace. How large can you make a namespace? And if you contrast where we are today, even from the early 2000s, I've completely lost track of analysts telling me how fast unstructured data is growing. I just read something that said in 3 years, we'll triple all the unstructured data that we have today. So block storage and file storage don't operate well at that scale. And the kind of data that we have now in unstructured data is also rich media. People no longer read documents. They look at small YouTube videos, just like we're doing on this podcast, right? So my thesis is object storage is built ground up to address massive scale, flat namespace, right? No real hierarchies, and metadata tagging, especially unlimited, in theory, user metadata. All of these make object storage great to address the future types of data that we'll be addressing. When we talk about primary storage, it's a kind of a nebulous word, right? What is primary storage really? Does it mean the quantity of data that we're going to address down the road? Or does it mean something like a low latency Oracle database of sorts?
I think it's interesting that object storage was sort of a solution that was rediscovered by the cloud. I mean, it was originally intended for secondary storage or archive, and it was actually pretty popular there in the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, there was this whole wave of content addressable storage, which was essentially just an object storage system. And then the cloud needed something scalable, and I think that they were sort of, oh hey, that can scale, because essentially an object storage system is a database, and you can shard it and you can create multiple nodes and have just massive scalability. It overcomes a lot of the limitations of traditional block and file storage simply because of its design. But it just seems to me kind of interesting that it was something that had not really taken the world by storm until cloud came along. And this poses a question: is the reason that it took off in the cloud sort of because it was capable of scaling, and that's what the cloud needed? Or is it because it is what the applications wanted? So in other words, did it take off just because of what it is, or did it take off because it was actually the right tool for the job?
I would say it sounds like both, right? If you think, because I think that's also could be, if you take that premise on further down the road, is that where some of the limitations with cloud become? That, there's things that traditional storage does better. And we've seen cloud move more and more to be able to be hybrid, as controversial as that term is right now, and being able to access different storage for different applications. It's always about the application to me, and we should use the best tool that we have. So thank goodness object storage is making a comeback.
Yeah, same goes for me. I think there needs to be at least the premises for object storage. They are really there, and there will be a lot of object storage, and a lot of the object storage is really good for everything that's going to happen in the next couple of years or tens of years. But there's still also a lot going on with applications that are already using the block storage or the file storage, and they will be there for multiple years as well. So yeah, like I mentioned before, I think it needs to be the right scale between all of those, and yeah, probably object storage will be eating a lot of all the others, but certainly not all for a foreseeable future, I guess.
Stephen, I will agree with Arjan. You know, it's not something that's going to happen next year or the year after. It's going to be a gradual process. Like Arjan's pointing out, right? Very good point. Is there's a bunch of applications, enterprise applications that have been written for block storage, and it's going to be hard to sort of go straight from that to object, because you know block storage gives you low latency, and just the HTTP semantics of object storage make it a little harder to achieve those latencies. And same thing with file, right? There's a lot of applications that have been written with files in mind, and changing applications at that scale is not easy to do. Yeah, there are basically connectors that connect file to object backend, but that adds a little bit of basically latency. And also all the semantics that you get out of file systems, you don't quite get by layering a file plugin in front of an object backend. I do agree with Arjan in that it's not going to be like in 2 years we see that all of file and object is gone. I'm sorry, file and block is gone and object is the only thing that's out there.
So we made the jump from sort of secondary storage, archive storage to cloud. And now it sounds like we're making a jump from cloud back to on-premises storage and enterprise storage. And I think that that's sort of the interesting next step here in this discussion. So if, if object made sense for web scale applications, and now it's coming back into the enterprise data center, does it make sense for enterprise applications, since we just heard that many enterprise applications expect block or file storage?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the organizations are looking into reorganizing their applications. You hear a lot going on about refactoring and all that kind of stuff to get your applications more cloud native, to put it that way. So I think there's actually a lot of applications will go that way, but again, it depends on the organization. A lot of the organizations, the enterprise organizations, have a much more aggressive way of getting applications refactored, or sometimes even get them into the cloud, while smaller or different use case applications that are running in other organizations will be doing the same thing for the next 10 to 20 years maybe, because that's how they did it, that's how the application is set up, and that's how the application needs to run, because sometimes there's even lives depending on it, and you will not change that in just a couple of seconds. So that depends on what kind of application are you using, and what the organization wants to do to rebuild or refactor the application. But I think there will be a lot going on in the enterprise industry, or the enterprises, that will make a lot of object storage get into the enterprises as well. Yeah, absolutely.
I keep thinking, NVIDIA thinks that the unit of measure going forward will be the entire data center. And when you make a claim like that, and of course they're looking to sell the compute piece of that to power it, if the unit of measure is the entire data center, then you need object storage. That sounds to me like that's where they're going. You need to have something that spreads across, a file system that allows you to go wherever it needs to go. And all of this reminds me when I came into IT, when Linux was just coming around, the whole compute wars. It's kind of coming to the storage again, because the storage wars happened at that point. It was what's SAN and what's NAS and which one should we use, and we're not using a mainframe anymore, and we're not keeping it on the computers anymore. So where do we go with this? And it sounds like we're coming back into some of those wars, to put it one way or the other. And I think what was really hard at that time, because I was a customer, is how do you decide which way to go? How do you decide which is the best for the applications you're running? Because it's becoming very obvious that the industry's shifting and I cannot run my application the way I used to. So what do I do? Which way do I go? I think that it's really important for people to understand what their choices are. So object storage now, I think, has a lot more to offer than maybe it did, when it first came about, like you were talking, Stephen. I think it's really important for folks to understand the choices that they have on premises and in the cloud. And when they're thinking about refactoring, like Erjan was talking about, and going cloud native, like what does all this mean? And where does object storage fit? Because it's obviously a choice, and you should be thinking about that before you start to make these migration plans, which everyone's planning because this change is upon us now.
So building on that, Gina, I think that you're dead on in bringing up the storage wars. And if there's one lesson that the storage wars taught us, it's that the application, the needs of the application drives the needs of the infrastructure. In other words, if this is a file application, then we need file storage. And yeah, we might be able to make it work with something else, but it really ought to use a NAS, for example. And Rajiv, I know that at Pure Storage, there was a decision to make basically a massive, scalable all-flash object store. What were the applications that you were targeting with that device, and what applications have taken off with that device?
Yeah, so when we actually built that back in 2016 is when we released that product. But the thought there was it was built to address what was termed the next-gen applications. And in our mind, the next-gen applications were analytics, next-gen analytics, and then machine learning and artificial intelligence, software development with the new paradigms, the DevOps paradigms. And then we were also looking at high-performance computing like EDA, et cetera. So what ended up happening, this was completely fortuitous, was one of the large hyperscale customers we were using was testing the product, and then they chanced up, they were trying to sort of figure out how to restore a certain set of databases very quickly, in minutes instead of hours. And they just tried to give it a shot, and they found out that doing that very fast also helped them with their SLAs. So we ran into this special use case called rapid restore. So most of the backups pay attention to backup, and restore is, it'll happen when it happens kind of thing. So when you need to restore something really fast, rapid restore became a very important use case for us. And so we're seeing a lot of traction today with the rapid restore use case, especially with ransomware, where you can have immutable snapshots. So there's a resurgence of that. And then we have analytics like Splunk, Kafka, the usual basically products that you want to talk about. We're also seeing a lot of traction with data warehousing analytics combined, like Vertica with Eon that I had mentioned earlier. We are seeing a lot of traction in EDA space. EDA is primarily file, to Arjan's point, right? I mean, they're not gone completely whole hog on object yet, but analytics, we're seeing a lot of object take off in the analytics space. Hopefully that answers your question, Stephen.
Yeah, it really does. And, I think it's interesting that, well, number one, once again, you've seen that the application finds the storage and not the other way around. And so, I don't want to say that you made a mistake in how you targeted the product, but, that the real compelling application for it was not maybe something you were thinking of on day one. It was something that came to you from the customers. And I think that's the best way to have something like that appear. Also, I really do find it amusing that it's come full circle from secondary storage back to secondary storage, but transformed by flash. And I think that that's the real interesting aspect here, is that the performance is orders of magnitude better than it used to be on old school CAS. Arjan, do you buy this? Does this seem like a good application?
Yes, for me it is. I think there's there's so much going on in the IT industry as a whole at the moment. Things like Project Monterey, that's already been called on. You're seeing a lot of the the companies, they are looking into, okay, so I've got a lot of data that I sit on. How am I going to utilize that? So doing the analytics, doing the machine learning, all that coming together and making sure that you've got a storage system underneath it that can handle it all. And like you already mentioned with Flash and Optane and all that kind of stuff that's coming into the world as well. I think object storage is actually has a bright future, but yeah, like I mentioned already before as well, I think there's still a lot going on in the block and file storage as well, but it will come together at some place. And I think that's where we're going to, and object will be very big. It's already very big because of the cloud, of course.
So that's really kind of what I would key in on here is that on-premises object storage is not the same as cloud storage. Perhaps it uses the same API, perhaps not, but we're not talking about the same beast, and we're not talking about the same use cases, right, Gina?
So yeah, I agree. I think that they're different beasts from the application point of view, but do we really know from what they're doing underneath the covers in the cloud? We really can't see it. What I was thinking when you called on me was about the people and about storage admins and IT ops on-prem. I think sometimes we start talking about Kubernetes and cloud native and all the application piece of it and developing the applications and developing that container infrastructure, that we forget about the storage it has to live on and which storage is that. And it's very important for our IT ops people on-prem not to go anywhere, to keep using their skills and to bring their skills along as we start transforming on-premises data centers. So we need folks that understand object storage. We need folks that understand SAN and file storage to help the developers bring this to ground, because we can't see what the clouds are doing below that IaaS level. We don't know what they're doing, but we for sure have people that know how to make all of this work on premises. So I think the application of it is probably going to look very different, but that might be because we have storage people on-prem that can make the storage be what the application developers need it to be.
Yeah, I think I would tie it back to what both Gina and Arjan had mentioned earlier. There are going to be applications that are already written, and there's a massive number of them. That's going to be really, really hard to change, right? And then there are new applications that are going to be written by customers that are probably mission critical or maybe basically custom. And those are right now, with the way customers are thinking, is they want any application that they write to be able to work both on premises and in the cloud. So it makes sense for them to do that. So when they do that, the natural tendency, I am guessing, is going to be that they would want to use S3 object storage as the backend. And then there's a packaged off-the-shelf applications. And those application vendors also want to be able to make sure that their applications work both on premises and in the public cloud. Just gives them a lot more addressable market. So they are finding ways, even the ones that have written with the block and file in mind, are trying to find ways to actually have some object play in their packaged applications. And you see that happening right now. It's not massive, but I think that trend is going to sort of grow. So down the road, to Arjan's point very early in the conversation, we will continue to have these applications. I hate to call them legacy applications, but that's what they'll be 10 years from now. I will continue to use block and file, and there'll be more and more object that comes out there. And there will also be very low latency application that'll still require block, for example. So, we as IT people tend to sort of pronounce the death of all kinds of technologies. We still have mainframes, we still have tape. So I think block and file will be there, but I think object's going to become more prevalent down the road. That's my thesis.
There's also the thing where you come in as a vendor, right? I guess that, like you already mentioned, going into it with hyperscalers talking with you guys about what they see on their part, as well as the enterprises talking with you what's going on their side. You're kind of the middleman bringing it all together. So there's a big opportunity for vendors like Pure as well, that to bring those two parties together and not learning from both sides and implementing that into the products that you have.
So that's really, I guess, the right way to finish this then. Let's look into our crystal ball here for a moment. And, what does the future hold for applications and thus for storage protocols and thus for storage devices? What are we going to see next? And I think I'll finish up with Rajiv, since you have the most, maybe direct customer contact from the Pure side. But, Gina, do you want to start us off? What does the future hold for object storage?
I really liked what Rajiv said about applications will go, customers want to write these emerging applications, so they will go wherever they are needed. Do they need to be on-prem, in the cloud? We didn't talk about edge, but that's kind of on-prem too, right? Someplace on-prem. And I think that's where applications will go. The applications will change from being tied to on-premises or in the cloud to, I need the ability to put that application wherever it's best for my users or whatever is using that application for the best performance. So tied to object storage, if the best place for that to be is on object storage, that's where it will be. And I think that's what's the future. It's always been about the applications, and that will continue to be what it's all about.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I think object storage has a very bright future. If you look at all the things that are going on in the industry, if you look at things like TensorFlow, if you look at everything going into, I think it's already mentioned, going into recordings, videos, and all that kind of stuff instead of everything into files. There is a very bright future for object. Still, I think there's so much other storage on the other side of the fence as well that needs to be tied together. And I think the vendors like Pure really have a play in that as well. So yeah, agreed with Gina, and I think object has a very bright future.
Yeah, I agree with both Gina and Ariane. The object's got a bright future, and I still think there'll be a lot of block and file also in the future.
Well, I guess the eyes have it. Object storage has a bright future, in the enterprise. And I think the big takeaway for me is that, object storage does not necessarily equal cloud storage, especially when you're talking about on-premises enterprise storage. And that's why it's better to have a sort of a purpose-built enterprise object option for primary storage and for secondary storage integration. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening to the On-Premise IT Roundtable. If you enjoyed this discussion, remember to subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcatcher, rate and review the show, since that does help our visibility. And please also share this show with your friends. This podcast is brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.